Well, welcome. I have a really special guest with me tonight. I am very excited. A longtime really friend and brother in the Lord, Robert Ferrell. Now,
Hello.
yep, Robert is an amazing man. He is an insanely adept researcher, and you might know his voice when he starts to talk. You'll recognize it. He is the king of putting out all of the writings that are coming to light in this day out for people to listen to. So I want to let Robert just introduce himself, and we're going to have a great night. We're going to talk about the keys to the kingdom, the sealed knowledge that is meant to come according to Enoch out in this time. So welcome, Robert.
Well, hello there, Miss Liz. Thank you so very much. You're too kind. Okay, so where do you start on something like this? Oh my goodness, it's such a far, wide-ranging thing. The first thing that I think that you probably would want to know about how it is that you arrive at biblical truth and the knowledge of these keys, I guess, is number one, you have to look at the Bible as though there's something to find. The Bible says things about itself, such as seek and you shall find, and knock and the door will be open. So you're looking to find things, you're looking for doors to be open, the doors of perception, the doors of understanding. And let me just preface this by saying that a lot of what I'm saying and a lot of where I'm coming from, it does come from a kind of a place of a childlike, sort of naive sort of point of view, a little bit like the child who points out that the emperor is not wearing any clothes.
Right.
And because so many people have taught and so much has been said that it really kind of obscures what's honestly there. And a lot of what we'll be talking about, or at least a lot of what I'll be talking about, is just simple, in your face, obvious information that exists that for whatever reason has seemingly been overlooked, swept under the rug, deliberately marginalized perhaps, and just not seen or whatever. And I believe that this is for a reason. And we'll get into this as all of this unfolds. But yeah, if you're supposed to knock to have the door open, and if you're supposed to seek in order to find, this implies that there's a little bit of onus on us to actually try. That it isn't just going to be handed to us on a silver platter. That we as a body, that we as God's people, it is somewhat incumbent upon us to do a little bit of the legwork, so to speak, and try to flesh these things out. So basically, having said that, where do you start?
Right. Well, and Robert and I, honestly, have talked a little bit in the beginning, and while we're like two sides of the same coin, because I was led into the same kind of thing that Robert would see, where the words would sort of vibrate, and you knew there was deeper meanings to this. And then I started to realize, that it is an encrypted text, and there are deeper meanings, and it's been done this way purposely. But as I studied, I was led into going into the Jewish exegesis, and finding out that, lo and behold, that is exactly how they understood the text, that you do need to seek and knock and ask. And this is why the Jews, they always are like into their Torah study is everything to them. And I think they have actually a much better tradition of understanding you got to dig this stuff out. It's not, the kindergarten level is great for kindergartners, but you, to be a wise, a sage, a person worthy of the kingdom, you have got to put the legwork in and seek it. And so it led me into kind of seeing the keys that were coming, that they had established, that they knew that this is the text, the way the text was written. So Robert and I, but he has done amazing amount of job of, especially like with the church, and understanding how Yeshua revealed to his disciples. It's a game of lost and found, and he has found it. The Jews are finding, we're all finding it. So we're in a great epic. He's going to talk about how Enoch, start with Enoch, the great place, 1:1.
Okay, well, first of all, let me back up just a tad. Enoch is a book that was left out of the Bible. There's really only one Christian denomination which is held on to the Book of Enoch all this time, and that would be the Ethiopic
Right,
Church,
right.
Ethiopic Church or whatever, of Ethiopia. And they held on to this scripture along with many others. They were basically essentially beyond the reach of Rome, and when they were trying to control what was being read and what was being burned and what was being retained, the book was lost to us, and then was recovered back in the 18th century sometime. I think it was 1773. I think it was found.
Right. Yep. Bruce,
And
the
came to
explorer
life.
Bruce, the
That's
Indiana Jones of his.
Yeah, well, but you know, it is something like an Indiana Jones, and a lot of times when you look at just texts in general, there is a lot of this sort of Indiana Jones to it, and some of it is serendipitous, some of it is just, you know, these things are found in monasteries, these things are found in scrap heaps, these things are found in
Caves, they come up out of the earth from caves. And
well, you know, it's a little bit like it talks about in Third Baruch, where it talks about, you know, earth, open up and, you know, reveal, and it talks about this. But basically, the idea is that scriptures are to be buried and then restored to us. Truth is to be, in a sense, buried and then restored to us. There is a time where we go from an enlightened state. Like, for example, one of these enlightened states was back in the early church when mysteries were revealed. We know, for example, that when Jesus came back, that he taught from the dead, of course, that he taught for 40 days among his students. And, you know, it would seem kind of pointless, I guess, if everything that he had said or everything he had spoken would somehow have been lost to the sands of time, so to speak. I think that what you're talking about here is that he was talking to people about how it is that you preserve the mystery, and how it is that the mystery, what it is that it means, and why it is that it should be hidden, because it's all meant to come out in a, you know, in a specific time, and that is to say at the end times, when the wicked and the godless are to be removed. And Enoch is very clear about this. He says that in the words of the beginning, the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation.
mm-hmm.
The wicked and the godless are to be removed. Right? And he takes up this parable and he says that Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, and he got the message from the angels showed him. But he's very clear about saying it is not for his generation, but for a remote one which is to come. And what's important about this is so that implies that there's got to be a mechanism or some kind of something in place that keeps this mystery out of the hands of the masses for some specified period of time, which we can flesh out. But I mean, as far as just what it is, it's something lost and then found. It's something that's sought for and then found. It's something that you have to knock on, if you will, in order for the door to be open. Jesus is the Logos. Jesus claims that he is the door. Right. So in other words, to open up the Logos or to open up the scriptures or whatever, you have to kind of knock a little bit. And what it sort of implies is that if you have to knock, if you have to seek, it's almost as if he's saying that the establishment itself is not going to give you this information, that the establishment itself is the barrier. Because if the establishment were giving it to you, you wouldn't have to knock, you wouldn't have to seek, you wouldn't have to find.
Right. I have to tell you, I have one of my paintings, The Door.
Oh, well,
I did that allegorically for tonight, where you're not. But you're right, because see, this is where it is sealed. It is. I want to give a couple of the words, because I know you talk upper wisdom and lower wisdom, which is a very apt way of describing this. But we're talking about it's called the mystery in the New Testament. Paul all the times talks about he received a mystery. The word mysterion, it's the sealed knowledge. The prophets talk. Daniel said, seal up this knowledge, right? He was told after he got all this revelation with very encrypted understandings, and then he just was like, seal it up. You have the wisdom. See, you're talking about the wisdom of this world, that Yeshua said the kingdom of this world is holding us down, keeping us from having access to the true wisdom from above. You got the dark sayings. I was looking at this is the dark sayings where they really obscure. It's very enigmatic. It's a saying that's very cryptic, and it's like, and they translate it like riddle, very, like, oh, it's just a little riddle. Well, it's not. An extremely obscure and enigmatic saying, or you got your parables and your allegories. So these are all in the camp of what we're talking about, that you do have to work really hard to.
Yeah, for example, the Gospel of Philip makes this clear. He talks about the Greek term ekmoth and ekamoth, one being the little wisdom, as he puts it, and one being the greater wisdom. Everything is something of a paradox. That's what, you want to say that it's simple yet complicated, or you want to say that it's straightforward and yet it's obscure. There is a sort of a paradoxical element that is at play. I think the one thing that really will make the difference is once you start seeing things, because then you know that they're there. And something about seeing a mystery, having a mystery reveal itself to you, or having a mystery revealed to you by another, such that your eyes are open, such that the scales, if you will, metaphorically fall off of your eyes. And you replace the eye of the flesh, if you will, with the eye of the spirit.
Right.
Replace the ear that hears the fleshly level with the ear that hears the spiritual level. You start to see it, and it's there. I mean, like, probably in the span of 1 or 2 minutes, you could probably go from, if you're open-minded. I mean, if you're open to it, that's the biggest thing, is you have to sort of yourself be a person who is willing to let God be true and every man a liar, if you're going to want to see through some of the illusions, if you will, some of the delusions, if you will, that obscure the truth. Because if faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, but you also have to hear with the spiritual ear.
And the more you hear, the more you hear and you begin to hear it and see it, the more you hear and see spiritually. And all of a sudden, the whole page starts to take on a new meaning, and the words, you start to see them in their deeper levels.
It feeds on itself. For example, like, I always start with Jude, and it's for a very good reason, I think, because it is the clearest, the most cut and dried. To me, I feel like this is one of the entrances to one of the greatest mysteries that God has laid down. That if you believe in tradition, if you believe in church tradition, if your faith is in that, there's some definite stumbling blocks to reading the book of Jude, for example, and among other books too. But the biggest stumbling block, really, for Christian tradition is in Jude, because in Jude 14 and 15, he does state that the quote goes like this: "And Enoch, also the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these men," or some cases it says to these men, saying, "Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all." And this is a direct quote from Enoch 1:9.
Right.
And so here's where the problem kicks in for traditionalists. If you're talking about traditional Protestantism, or even Catholicism, or even Eastern Orthodox, or any of those other religions that don't have the Book of Enoch, which is pretty much every religion, every Christian denomination, because no Christian denomination puts this book up as canonical, or as sacred, or as holy. At the best, they'll tell you that maybe parts of it are, or something like that, but that it's not canon, right? And so you're faced with a conundrum, because here you have a writer of New Testament scripture who's presumably a brother, even.
Yes, a brother of Yeshua. So we're not talking about just anybody.
Yeah. So in other words, you have to imagine he has some familiarity with the things that were taught, and that he wouldn't be presenting something that wasn't representative of what Jesus himself would have said or believed or taught. And if you read, for example, there are a lot of references that even Jesus makes to the Book of Enoch, where he talks about, for example, of the scene of Lazarus and the rich man, for example, is borrowed largely from the book of Enoch. He talks about the spring of water, which is a common feature that's mentioned in Enoch that Jesus brings up. He talks about the light in that situation. He talks about the great gulf that separates the souls of the people once they pass from this world, and basically as a place of waiting and stuff. And all that, comes from our, the Lord's mouth. And so we know that he has some familiarity with the text. And now for his brother Jude to be citing it, it's very important to realize that this is kind of where the two roads part, because a traditional explanation will try to minimize the significance of what Jude is saying here, whereas an honest, I think, a person will look at what Jude is saying and they'll see certain things that are there. They exist as literary features of the document. And this is what's also clear. This should be clear to anyone who approaches the subject, that you don't even really have to be a Christian to see this, because these things exist literarily. And I think this is what really paves the way for the whole world to have maybe the potential for a dialogue with the world about these documents, the veracity of these documents, because these truths exist on a literary level. There's a literary basis to what's being said,
Well,
rather than just a faith base. Because a faith base, somebody could just say, well, that's just what you believe, or that's what you think, or that's whatever. And you think this and I think that, and the other guy thinks the other. I'm saying you get caught forever going around in circles, never able to come to any logical or agreed upon.
right. But
Mhm.
well, I just see that's a great place to start, and this shows how we are on two sides of the same coin, and that this information. See what you have seen in Jude, who is the brother. It says very clear of Yeshua. They were, and I have done a lot of research on this, and that the researchers come at most from that he was an Essene. And the Essenes, Josephus talks about three groups of people. You had your Sadducees, your Pharisees, and you had your Essenes. Now that's a people group that's totally been wiped off the modern mind. We don't understand, it's like they never existed. You got your Sadducees, you got Yeshua, and you got the Romans and the Pharisees. But the biggest player in this was the Essenes. And this is the group that Yeshua came on. They were Enochian. These people, when you really, because I've done a lot of study with the Essenes and their group. So with Enoch receiving these mysteries, what I have discovered is the righteous remnant, all the way really from Adam to Enoch, again, through the flood, through Shem, through Abraham, through Isaac, into Moses, into the Jews. This knowledge has been kept really close amongst really a small remnant, like it says, the wise that would get the books in every generation. It really was passed down, I found out, orally. Like you said, what was the methodology? This is the oral Torah. They had insane ways in which they would called mnemonic, where they would transmit the information. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's proven, like you say, literary. There were over the Enochian literature was about the third largest group of books found. They have so many fragments proving that Yeshua read this. That Jude and Yeshua and the early disciples, this is one of the most popular books to read. Enochian literature was in at the time. So you can't, there's no way you can blow it off, because history, literature, and the fact that the text says it, it's all witnesses to this fact. So, and I think, again, what I have really seen, this Enochian, it always goes back to Enoch, that this revelation has been kept, and it has been kept in a very cagey way all through the centuries. And Yeshua, being a Jew, we always say he was a Jewish carpenter, right? But this is the stream. This is what he came out of. This was his knowledge, and it would make so much sense that Jude, because they were always in the whole history, they were outside of the temple. They had gone to Damascus to basically wait for the Messiah, because they knew he was coming. And the temple and the Pharisees and the Sadducees had become so corrupt. So just what you're saying, the situation was such that the truth. He said, you can't get the truth. You have stolen the keys to the kingdom. The people can't get the right information.
Right. And again, this is one of these off ramps that I'm talking about. Like where you leave the idea of tradition behind and follow the word of God, you go on an entirely different path. Because what we were talking about earlier, there basically are two kingdoms and two ways of looking at things and two spirits. And this is one of those things that just behind the scenes in everything that we're talking about. There is the kingdom that seeks to preserve itself, and then there is the kingdom, if you will, that seeks to enlighten people and to free people from that other system. There is a way off, and this is what I was saying. This is kind of a way off the Christian establishment, the Christian traditionalism. This is a way to see something with direct perception and not have any question about it, because it exists there literarily, it exists there objectively. Like what I was saying, when he says that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these men, and then he gives the quote, if you look at it from a literary standpoint, just a purely structural standpoint, there's specific data that are given. First of all, the source is cited. He says in Enoch also. So he credits the source, right? And this is something which would have been well known. And in fact, the way that he brings it out sort of in an off-the-cuff kind of way, right, means that his audience, or whoever it was that he wrote this letter to, would have had some familiarity with the writing and would have believed it because he quotes it as authoritative.
I think it was a very common text. All the ancient world, it just wanted to, from what I might say of Enochian literature, the libraries in Alexandria, they say, and that was some of the greatest tragedy to the Western world, that we really lost all the texts, the Enochian commentaries and books about Enoch and literature that was written. There were over 100,000 Enochian texts in those libraries. Can you imagine? It was very known understanding back then.
I think the wonderful thing about it is that even though we have lost a tremendous amount of information, that the traces that are left to us are enough to undermine the false teachings. And again, Jesus talks about, the truth won't be obscured so much, that we wouldn't be able to recover it. It means that there will be an effort to cover things up. There will be an effort to destroy things. But the genius in couching heavenly meaning in earthly terms is, and making it all pervasive throughout the scriptures, making the scriptures always speak on multiple levels, no matter what. It means that whatever is left to us, there's always the potential that truth can be found and the paradigm transcended. And again, this is about transcending the paradigm. The paradigm is that we have this set of books that we, based on our assessment, our authority, our judgment, that we have determined are reliable, and then there's this whole other group of books that are less reliable, and then there are these books that are just beyond the pale. And this has always been the tradition. This was what the scribes and the Pharisees essentially came to the conclusion when they formed their canon. Of course, this was after Jesus's death and resurrection, that it was actually formally that way. But the basic idea is that the canon is the canon because we say so.
Or they say so. I mean,
yeah, right? Sure. Yeah, so in other words,
it's the hierarchy.
We've gotten together and we have held a synod and we have discussed.
And we're the experts. We're the scribes, the Pharisees. We're the doctors of the law.
Right, and so it's based on our authority and our say so, and so that's essentially the basis. And within what they have preserved for us, and not just the Jews, of course, the Christians, of course, they canonize their own set of books as well, following suit, of course, because the idea is that if you understand the keys, it's kind of like understanding a language. In fact, pretty much it's the same thing as understanding another language, because you're hearing everything on another level. And people are used to this because, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about movies or common literature. people are always talking about there's multiple levels of meaning on just about anything that exists.
That's why you take college level literature classes, right? So
Right.
you can get into all the different levels of
Because there's historical and there's allegorical
right,
and
right.
but so it's not an uncommon thing in literature. It just so happens that it exists in the Bible, and I think it does so by design. I think that, for example, that Jude citing the source, giving him the antiquity, calling him the seventh from Adam, that these are deliberate things that God has left
Right.
for people to see. And if they don't choose to see it, then what's happened is they've if for some reason they have a problem accepting what Jude accepts, then they've parted ways with Jude. You know what I'm saying? It would be just as if to say they were forming their own religion apart from what he was saying. And it's not just Jude. This is what's kind of airtight about the whole argument, because if you look at the New Testament, other than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which it's hard to say if one was based on another or whatever. There's this whole synoptic problem with those. But other than that, there are no two books in the New Testament which are more similar than 2nd Peter and Jude. It is almost as if Peter has taken Jude and written around it,
Right.
or
And
possibly that the two of them wrote together in order to create a third or longer document, or a third or longer understanding that could be inferred from seeing the two together.
If you take some of these characters historically, Peter, and I use a lot of the Hebrew names only because but Peter, James, who was another brother of Yeshua, right, who was the head of the Jerusalem church. These are all Essenes. They all have a very similar worldview, which you said is very much, it's, and they would do the sons of light or the sons of darkness. And a book like the Didache, it's totally, choose your path. One leads to death, one leads to life. It's very kind of black and white. That is such an Essene. That is the way Yeshua said. He said, I have words of life. He was never timid about saying that.
You walk with men or you walk with God, and that's it's a blessing in as much as when you see it, you can transcend so much of what you've been taught. That's the beauty of having. I feel like the world in a way, because the scriptures are written kind of ambiguously, and I say that not because they have that they're not solid, but there is a way in which if you follow men and you follow tradition, right, then they will read one way to you, and it will obscure that higher level meaning, because you've chosen not to follow that higher level path. It all boils down to you kind of and your choice. Because like I said, if you're actually following the scriptures, like right when you get to that point where he says, okay, here is the source, here is the antiquity, he's the seventh from Adam, here is his role, he is a prophet because he prophesied, right? So in other words, if, for example, he's saying that he's a prophet and the Christian leaders are saying he's not, if Jude is asserting that this book is valid and the traditionalists are saying it's not, right? So then you have to decide at this point, you're either walking with God or you're walking with men. And what happens if you choose to walk with God? Because Enoch, again, he walked with God and God took him. Now I think there's some metaphor to that in a sense, because the book itself was taken, his meaning was taken, the prophecies were taken, and literally the book was destroyed, the book was burned. Apart from the Ethiopic version, we really only have a few scattered Greek fragments, and that's really it. I mean, this was how thorough a job
I know.
the
In
church.
the dark age, I was just thinking, because the way it taught, the verse talks about how knowledge will increase, but that was in about 1730, and it took about 120 years for those texts to really get translated and kind of hit the West in the scholarly world. And then that took about, really now that it's hitting the minds of most people, the last 30 years, even in the last 20 years, where people are becoming aware of Enoch. So where time is getting shorter on these things, but even the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found those. It took 50 years before those were made available to the public. But now with the internet, at the click of a button, I mean, that's the amazing thing. People have no excuse really, because it's so easy. You just click a button and you can find these texts.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I got started on this stuff like right when I became a Christian. I became a Christian back in the early 90s, converted from atheism, and I came to the conclusion that I wanted to find the Book of Enoch once I realized what it was. And it took me a while to realize what it was. I know I've told this story before, but I'm reading Jude and I come across the verse, and I'm reading the King James Version, and there's an internal concordance. You go back to Genesis where it tells you to go, and the quote's not there. And I'm scratching my head like, well, okay, so what is that? And I pick up a few other Bibles, and I finally find one that has an actual cross-reference, and it simply states, quoted from the non-canonical Book of Enoch 1:9.
So you didn't even know that there was such a thing, right?
The sky is blue and everything you know is a lie. So, it's a little bit like that, because it makes it clear that people are covering this up. So even in this day and age, they're playing it down, or they're covering it up, or they're acting like it doesn't exist. And that's those are the kinds of behaviors like when in 1 John, where it says that no lie is of the truth. So once you start dealing with little lies and little deceptions, right, that should be your tip off. And it's like what some people would probably say was a quote unquote white lie, or a little lie, or a fib, or something like that. That is so far from the case, because you're talking about something so fundamental here. You're talking about literally, here is a writer of scripture who believes this, and we're teaching against it.
Right.
And beyond that, here you have another writer, which is Peter, writing basically essentially around this book, as if to in a sense bolster this book, or bolster the credibility, or at the very least to ensure that it doesn't get lost to us. Because again, you're put in a weird sort of situation where even if you want to throw Jude out, now you got to throw a letter from Peter out too, because Peter's defending that book.
And and even there, this, and I think the gal who did a bunch of videos on this, that once you have read Enoch and understand it, you immediately see all the cross references in Old Testament and New Testament. And once you're familiar with Enoch, you see it all over the Old and New Testament, and you just see where this is coming from. I mean, Genesis 6, we have one little tiny verse, but it's totally spelled out in Enoch. You can't get around it.
And sometimes a little something like that, I think, tells you something too, because why would Moses only feel that he needs to write just 6 verses regarding it and then move on, as if to say he didn't need to unpack it because it was something that was so understood at that.
Yeah, it's like preaching to the choir. I mean, a lot of that's why we get these 1 or 2, 3 verses, because why would you have to preach to the choir? These people grow up knowing their history and the stories, the great epics. And he even says in one point, if you want to know more about the story of Joshua, go read the book of Jasher.
Right, exactly.
That's the big story. That'll give you all the details you want.
Right, but again, it really boils down to honesty or dishonesty, and this is where you really have to understand that when Jesus talks about there being that narrow path and that tiny gate that you have to pass through in order to have the kingdom open up to you.
The love of the truth is the only thing that's going to do it.
And what else would it be? Because the thing about it is, when you get to the end of the road, the question will be asked, did you seek? Did you not? Right? Did you
ask me? Did you ever ask me?
Exactly. In other words, and the Bible's very clear about this. Paul says, let God be true, though every man is a liar. And I take that very literally, like as if to say, if all of history, all of tradition, even if every single Christian denomination out there says that this is not true, but you read it in the Bible, Paul is saying you could take that whole thing and just set it aside, at least insofar as that's concerned, because you have to let God be true, even though every man is a liar, even though every person is lying to you about something like that. Because the truth is, like I said, when Jude gives him the antiquity, when he gives him the status of the prophet, as a prophet, when he cites the source, when he gives the quote, all of that is affirmation of the book. So where is there room in that for negation of the book? And where is there room for negation of Jude? Because what is the negation of Scripture if not blasphemy of the Holy Spirit? Because you're saying, you know, it's one thing to say, well, maybe it reads this way or maybe it reads this way, but this is so black and white. This is so blatant. And this is actually like what I was saying before. It's written on a literary level. The fact is that literarily, there's no room for interpretation. Literarily, the source is cited. Literarily, the time frame is given, the seventh from Adam. Literarily, it states, it's Jude's opinion, literarily, that he is a prophet, and that the prophet bears upon the coming of our Lord. You know, and so whether you...
But see, they do, Robert, see, this is, it's all, I call it a propaganda war. And there's it's all about control of information. I mean, but even the fact that they found all these copies in the Dead Sea Scroll. I mean, how much has that really gotten out to the general Christian church population? That this is a legitimate book that was read. It's known. You can see, like I said, there are so many witnesses where you cannot deny this book and its place in the stream, the tradition stream. But, you know, back to the keys, I want to make a point, like you were saying, the Spirit leads us into truth. You know, again, we were never taught, because the Essenes are taught this thing, how to become a spiritually minded person and learn to learn. But you know, when Paul says we war against principalities and powers, this is when you were talking about this, when I first got saved, and I started reading, so I kept going, oh my gosh, they lied to me. Like the whole world, my whole life, you know, they lied to me about this. They lied to me about this. You know, in so many ways, and the devil is a liar. So I guess a lot of it is it is a love of the truth, ultimately, that has to take you here. But you know how in the Pharisees with the leaven, you know, the leaven of the Pharisees, because back to the keys, because I think that the real rub, in my opinion, was it wasn't that they weren't teaching the law, because they were. Yeshua said, do what they say, because they're teaching you Torah stuff and all this stuff. But if you don't have the keys, and I think this is the problem with it, you just have to make it up what the encrypted or the parabolic meaning is. See, and I think that's what he was telling he kept saying to the Pharisees, that, you know, you're just full of, they were just making stuff up. They did not have the real keys. They had lost it. They were not of the true tradition, you know, like say of the Essenes that were coming through with the, because the Essenes are known as quote unquote the keepers of the secret. I don't know if you know that is really what they're keepers of the secret. So obviously what secrets, and here you have the Pharisees, they're teaching, and they're just making stuff up. And I feel like that's what Christianity has done for the last 1900 years, you know, since we lost all this, just making stuff up.
I think that there's sort of there's a definite strategy there. I you know, there's an old saying, and I'm not sure who quotes it, whose quote it is, but it says that the good is the enemy of the best.
Right,
and
right.
The way that I would read this is because the something about mediocrity or commonality, or, you know, least common denominator or something, you know, it's this great pull towards the middle. And then, you know, there's always the best and there's the worst. But the problem, I think, lies largely in consensus. Now, you have a huge number of people who probably aren't going to church to sincerely, honestly find the truth. They have ulterior motives. They have other reasons why they want to do it. Or they don't feel that hunger for the truth. They don't feel like, oh, there's just something missing. There isn't that call on their heart. And so by the numbers, you know, the people who genuinely might be looking for the truth, they're sort of drowned out for one thing. And also they may not really be able to see past the idea that everybody thinks this way. So therefore, there must be some wisdom to it. There must be some truth to it, because everybody can't be wrong, you know. But seeing just a little bit behind the curtain, let's say, of what's going on, you do see that some of this is wrong and some of this is just downright false, what they're teaching us, and runs counter to really to truth itself. And so a person who respects truth, a person who searches for truth and makes truth their number one guide in life,
which is what we're supposed to do.
history.
I mean,
but you know, if that's what you're supposed to do, then you have to learn, I guess, to see through the lies. But the problem is the lie is so big and it's so all pervasive, and there's so many seemingly good people out there who just seemingly you know, like because they create this sort of facade, I guess, of good, clean living, upright, righteous people, right? Which again, they may well be good people in most regards, and I'm not trying to knock most people or most Christians. I'm trying to kind of dance around this a little bit. But within that milieu, there are people out there who want to see beyond that and who want to learn beyond what the average person wants to learn.
Right.
Who want to actually go and try to find the meat of the scriptures, whereas some people might just be satisfied with ritual prayers, or, you know, church attendance, or, you know, doing this, that, or the other, getting involved in good works, you know, and all of those things may have some function and may be commendable on some level. The fact is that your number one task is to seek and to find and to knock and to have the door open to you, because there's something to find. And the thing about it is, I don't think that people realize quite that there is something to be found, that they don't even know that the keys exist. And it comes back to what you said, you know, the scribes and the Pharisees, or in Luke's case, it's the lawyers who take the key of knowledge and hide it and prevent those who want to enter in, you know, and so they're the ones who are standing in the way. And again, some of it may be unintentional. I don't think that, you know, that there's a large number of people who know, and so they don't know to lie.
Right.
They just, you know, they don't see it is all. And so,
but see, I think this is why Jude is such a good book, because Jude really tells you in positive, we really are in a war against principalities and powers. I mean, this is a spiritual war. So there are, you know, if we have a Hasatan, an enemy adversary who is a spiritual entity, he is trying to fight in our mind, because truth, that you have to access it in your mind. There is this whole world of a web. I mean, see, so a lot of the keys, you know, describe this concept of this propaganda war, or the war that is in the mind, and how hard it is for people to get to truth. Even if they want truth, you know, sometimes it's really hard to find it. And how, I mean, that is the story, because I mean, I saw it for many years, you know, and people do the same. They go to Buddhism, they try all sorts of things. And it really is an act. I think there has to be an inner sincerity of the heart, or however, you know, and then they come to truth. It's never, you know, everybody's story is different. But back to this, the concept of the wisdom that is not of this world. There's a wisdom of this world, and there's a wisdom that's not of this world. And a lot of this stuff I have lately, just to digress, I've really been studying angels. I know this sounds like, but the whole angelic, or the whole unseen world, the invisible realms, because there is so much information. I mean, basically the level that people get in churchianity on angels is little cherubs that fly around with wings, right? Well, I mean, my mind is still reeling on how much is in our text, how much we can really know about the spiritual world, and how much our ancients did know, and how that so much of the text is written about all of this interactions. I mean, literally from Genesis 6 to Moses, the adversary contending for the body of Moses. What is going on? So there's so much information once you get down this, or let's say once you get on this path. We were talking about the rabbit trails and being lateral thinkers. I mean, I always have like 10 different holes I'm digging at the same time. It's an inexhaustible world. It's extremely exciting. We should tell people this is the best road you can get on in town, right?
There's certainly no end to it.
Right.
You know, and it's hard to even point to a beginning. You know, you start somewhere and eventually you come across, you know, a path that leads you away from tradition and into higher awareness and into a deeper knowledge and a deeper understanding. I mean, I guess the thing that I was trying to say and what I was trying to communicate, and I don't know how effectively I've done it so far, but what I'm saying is there is an antidote to all of this ignorance, and that has been provided for us. It is a method, is a means for us to escape the thought traps, the spirit traps, the snares that have been laid for us, and that basically comes through hearing and seeing spiritually what is being said to us. I mean, reading between the lines, for example, again, going to Jude, when you're talking about the devil when contending with the body of Moses or whatever, durst not, lay a railing accusation, if you will, against the devil, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." For example, well, that's another reference to another non-canonical book.
Right, right.
So here you have Jude making at least two separate references to non-canonical literature, which again underscores the fact that something's being held back. Something has been taken from our understanding. Something has been omitted because we don't have this book anymore. We're lucky to have Enoch basically in its entirety, which again is a blessing. And that's what it says it is too. It is the blessing, the word of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed
the elect and the righteous.
And the righteous who will be living in the day of tribulation.
Right.
So again, when you talk about the great tribulation that's coming up, this is basically I'm reminded of the way in which an insect molts, which I'm sure you've seen, or a butterfly coming out of its, chrysalis or whatever. When you see this happening, it's like saying, this old thing that I used to be, right, I was developing in there this whole time. And, now that I'm leaving, I am bigger, I am larger, I am different, I am changed, I am more supple. This other thing doesn't suit me anymore. And, Christianity
putting the new wine in a new wineskin. You have to really.
Yeah. And Christianity has the antidote built in. So when I talked about it being ambiguous before, what I mean is there's a way in which you can see it, which brings you to the level of the flesh and the fleshly level understanding. And this is where kind of the problem in a way lies, because if you read it on a fleshly level, it still seems spiritual. And it is, and I'm not saying it's not. Like, for example, when you see Jesus walking on water, or you see him healing a disease, right? If a person, if you saw a person, like literally saw a person bring back another person from the dead, that would be incredible. That would be awesome. It'd probably freak you out.
Well, it happens. These are miracles.
And because it totally trashes the whole fleshly concept of the world. And so for Jesus to literally raise a person from the dead, or literally to open a person's eyes, or literally to open a person's ears, or to perform some miracle, even on the level of the flesh, it seems miraculous and glorious and amazing. And so the fleshly level is so plausible and so powerful just on its own that you don't dare look for more. It's as if you see the glory, and because you see the glory, you're not looking for the surpassing glory, if you will. In other words, he's topping himself. He's he's going from glory to glory. He's speaking from great things to greater things.
Right. That's kind of Jacob's ladder. That's the whole concept. And we're supposed to go from glory to glory, climbing the ladder. We're supposed to go higher and higher in supernal understandings, in wisdom.
And that's what it does, because when you recognize, for example, when you start hearing with your spiritual ears and you start seeing with your spiritual eyes, okay, then the miracle is being performed on you. You're being healed of your spiritual blindness, You know, you're being healed of your
Right.
spiritual paralysis. You're being healed of your spiritual
Yeah.
deafness.
You're
And
coming back from the
so
dead. You're waking up.
all of a sudden it
All those
applies to
things.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so once you realize that you can slough off all of that other stuff, and again, I have to be very delicate when I say this because I don't want to be disrespectful to, you know, normative Christianity in such a way as to paint them all, you know, as black hats and bad people and then that kind of thing, because that's not at all what I'm getting at. It's like what I'm saying now. It's you're so caught up in the glory that you don't even dare to ask. You don't even dare to think that there might be something more glorious that's there. You know, you
Right.
kind
And
of see it all cut and dried, and you
yeah,
know.
and even we had talked earlier too, there for everything there is a time and a season. But see, I think part of the message, especially of the elect in us, is to tell people that, you know, there is he will pour out his spirit on all flesh. There is a new download coming. We are in the season now where there is going to be such an a raising of the bar of spiritual understanding. That's why the books are coming back. I mean, there's many prophecies that talk about the secret things. I mean, Mark here talks about, for nothing is hidden except to be revealed, nor has anything been secret, but that will come to the light. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. So this is all prophesied. And it's telling people we live in an amazing time where we can access text and we can put together our true heritage and tradition according to truth, going all the way back from Enoch, and we can separate the wheat from the chaff, you know, the lies from the truth, because Yeshua says, I mean, we will have one faith. It's going to be one Lord. We're a sense of echad, of oneness, of unity. We're going to put it all back together. So, or at least we're going to be on the road when this age. See, because I just want to say I have this because I do go back a lot, like we said, to, like, I have discovered the House of Judah writings. One of the Targums says very clearly in the Palestinian Targum, you know, which is, you know, a translation like an amplified Bible, but it talks about how Judah will have, that the teaching of the law will never cease from his seat, not Saphras, which are scribes or sages or teachers, will never leave from the house of Judah. That even our Christian writings, see, this is the thing, we think they're Christian writings, but they really are just an extenuation of the same story of the righteous remnant, right? I mean, we're not different people. Yeshua was the Jews, but this whole idea that in Second Ezra, we should touch on that, the books that, you know, the 24 that were for the profane, the 24 that are for everyone. It's not that it's bad, because I was a Christian technically, just like you said, for 30 years. I mean, I was a good person, you know, and I love the Torah or the Bible, and I would read it and get a lot. But there was a certain point in time where I feel like, you know, my eyes were open. I was drawn into, and we need to tell people this is where people really can go, need to go, because there is a whole group on the planet today that if people really get the wisdom and the understanding and the really what's going on, I say behind the veil, because this really is a spiritual story we're living through, it is going to tip. And it talks about the fruit of the land, like, okay, I'll give my sage commentaries and you're going to take it from the, like, sort of more of a Christian commentary, but they're both two sides of the same coin. Rashi talks about how we are the fruit of the land, the children of the righteous, the fruit of the tree of life. It's the same concept. There's a plant growing and it's going to be revealed in all the earth. There's going to, you know, if there were 120 in the upper room, I think by the time Yeshua return, it's going to be a huge body of people, an army that will tip the balance. That's why Enoch says when the wicked will be no more removed. Because I think one thing this has done for me, Robert, and you testified, it has given me such understanding, reading all the extra canonical books, getting a handle on all this information. It's like I feel like I can see Satan 360 degrees. Like there's no lie. I mean, I can just, okay, I get that one. You take your sword and you can just, it has helped me have sight 363 instead of just this narrow little band that I was able, and the rest of the time I was getting punched in the head and didn't have any way to defend myself, right? That's just sort of one way I put it.
Well, Again, I think there's a three-part revelation, and that's something that's always been latent within the Old Testament scriptures. I've talked about this a dozen times before, but when you look at the symbolic items that are in the Ark of the Covenant, for example,
Right.
this is a box that contains God's covenants with man. And here you have the tables of the law, Aaron's rod, and then you have the golden jar of manna. It's interesting if you break that down and see it as three testaments. Again, Aaron was the high priest, and symbolic of
Oh,
the way that Jesus is our high priest. And Hebrews explains this a little more in depth about that. His rod was taken and bound with the rods of the other 11 tribes, and tested overnight, and his bore fruit. Now, again, a rod, what we would call a cane, this is where we get the term canon from. Canon and cane are related terms. It
yeah,
was a
it's one of
measuring
its meanings.
stick.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a measuring stick. And so if he represents the Second Testament, or the second symbolic item, which is in the Ark of the Covenant, or if you will say the box of, with three symbolic items in it, and each one of these represents a revelation, if you will, of the covenant. We already have had the first two, which is to say, we have had the Old Testament, we have had the New Testament. These are symbolized by the tables of the law and Aaron's rod. Now, Aaron's rod, there is the fact that it budded and then was put into the Ark of the Covenant. If you see the canon, if you will, or the cane, if you will, bearing fruit, which is essentially what we're talking about now, the keys bringing, if you will, the fruit of God's patience, the fruit of his labors, if you will, to bear at the proper season, at the proper time. If this happens to be at the time of the removal, if you will, of the ungodly and the wicked, when the truths are revealed, if you recognize that pattern, that threefold pattern, then you realize that God's truth comes in threefold. And if you see that, then when you read in the New Testament or the Second Covenant, where Jesus is talking about that Elijah both has come and will come, right? As if to say there is a future revelation, and there will be, of course, the spirit and the power of Elijah then in the future to make things right. And that the comforter, or the spirit of truth, is another thing that will come and will lead us into all truth. This is a future thing. That represents that third manifestation, that third revelation, which is symbolically the third, which supposedly gives us, symbolically gives us that third item, which is the jar of manna, which again, this is food, spiritual food to be eaten, which is concealed, which is hidden. And when you read in the book of Revelation, he's talking to the churches. He says, look, if you will, whoever overcomes, I will give to eat of the hidden manna. So in other words, you get to eat of that third covenant, which is to say the hidden books, the hidden manna, that third symbolic item. You get to eat of it by overcoming. And how do we overcome? How are we overcome? Like when you read, for example, starting out with the book of Jude, but there's a million other examples. Again, that being the most clear cut. Once you realize, okay, if I side with Jude, then I overcome the world. I overcome tradition. I overcome all of these naysayers and all of this teaching. This whole corpus of teaching essentially sloughs off, like I said, like an insect molting its old, whatever that is, their old casing that
Right, the
they were
casing.
in.
And they
And
become a butterfly,
and then
beautiful new
essentially, yeah,
creation.
you become a new creature. You become a new
Yes.
being.
Yeah.
And all that's left is this husk. And
And
I
they call
think
it the cup up.
that's
Yeah.
it's called a what? I'm
Well,
sorry.
the garment. See, this is
Oh
kind of
yeah.
the idea too. The flesh, the garment. So,
Hmm.
he's going to roll it all up. We're going to leave this earthly garment.
But this is very tangible because, like what I was saying before, these are very literary arguments and they're structural arguments. And there's a certain interpretational aspect to it. I'm not going to lie. But the thing is, this is where consistency comes in. And you were talking about earlier about the tautology of it. You were talking about the way in which, for example, and I've said it before, by means of parallelism, by means of simile, by means of metaphor, by means of sometimes process of elimination. There are logical means by which you can come up with keys.
Well, I have lists and lists, and I've broken them down, like vegetation used as keys, architecture used as keys, anthropomorphic keys, when you give, God has a hands or a feet. There's minerals that are used as keys, and this is all, I just have to say, because I was telling you this tautology, because we know that the early text was written without vowel points and with no chapters or any numbers or anything, right? So how did they do this? But what I found out is they wrote in columns, and they wrote in a very parallelistic or tautology way. So it's a formula. So you'll state the word in actually the plain meaning, and then you'll state it in the encrypted meaning. So 1 plus 1 equals the meaning. So you have it once in the plain meaning, and you have it once in the encrypted meaning. That's originally how they did it. And that's really a way that they passed it on down. Now, when we started putting chapter headings in and putting commas, we've really screwed the whole thing up. But if you look at Hebrew, and they had all these different keys on how they would preserve, arcane, esoteric. Another word I like to use is just esoteric information. If you go to Ezra's, you got this, we were talking about the 70 books for the wise, that what we're talking about biblically too is that there is, the milk of the word that is good for everybody. And you do want to raise your children on the meat of the word, a lot of the word. A lot of the keys, a lot of the deeper information you get is nothing that you really want to give to children, because it's too heavy, it's too meaty. Paul says there's meat, little kids don't have teeth. So there is a progression in this thing. You do grow in wisdom and understanding, but Ezra has one of the best examples of it, stating very clearly that there is exoteric knowledge and there is esoteric knowledge. And what we're talking about is really how there has been preserved esoteric understanding until this time. And then it's going to come out. The secret things belong to the Lord, and he's going to bring them out. But when you were talking about the different I just want to say on tautology, the rabbis have this thing I called pards, which I was saying, which is it's their exegesis. It's an acronym for, it's PRDS. There's 4 levels of meaning to every single scripture verse. That's what, and then they'll say every word has multiple meanings. It's very polysemous, but P standing for the plain meaning, which, it's for a child, anybody can understand. Then they have what they call R, which is remez, which means hint. It means like a little, you think, oh, there's something a little deeper going on here. And then D is for drash, which means the midrash, which is sort of, I said, gets kind of all into the law, the ethics. There's a huge part of the halakha. And then the S is what we're talking about, which in Hebrew is the word sud, which means mystery, which really does mean a deep, encrypted, coded, sealed mystery. And that's what's all coming out.
Well, there's exactly. Paul talks about that, the mystery of iniquity.
That's right.
There is a mystery of iniquity, what we would call Babylon, what we would call the kingdom of darkness. It's so multifaceted. God has his plan, and he has his will. And what makes it almost irresistible, largely, is that his will, in some sense, is to allow the mystery of iniquity to unfold. So in other words, if it's the devil's will to create this prison, if you will, for souls and minds and spirits of human beings, to cripple us, to blind us, to make us deaf, to benight us, if that is his goal, so that he can then come in and enter our thoughts, because he's already taken out God, he's already taken out truth, he's already taken out righteousness. What is there to live for but the self?
The standard, there's no standard. It's a free-for-all.
Well, exactly. And so this is the mystery of iniquity. Now, if God allows this, then his will becomes, in a sense, that the mystery of iniquity plays itself out. In some sense, there isn't this friction between God and the devil like you would think, because from God's point of view, this will all play out, and it will all fall, it will all fail, it will self-destruct. It talks about this in the Gospel of Truth, that error erred. Or I'm sorry, this is the Odes of Solomon. I'm sorry, but in any case, it talks about the error, if you will, which is to say the kingdom of darkness, the kingdom of lies. Like a lie can only go on for so long before it self-destructs. Any falsehood, anything that's not sustainable, will eventually fall flat.
And that's a law of physics.
Collapse under its own weight.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit in allowing it to happen, if you want to call it that, is that the questions get answered. In other words, nobody, once this all comes and goes, once everything that could stand in the way of God's truth has stood in the way of God's truth, once everything that has kept us from seeing can no longer keep us from seeing, once everything that can keep us from hearing, understanding, growing, whatever, once all of that fails, right, then it fails forever. And it fails completely. And it utterly fails, utterly. I mean, I don't know how to say, well,
it says the trap that they laid will fall on them. There's a lot of ways allegorically where it says that the trap that they laid will eventually ensnare them.
So, people talk about, is it our will or is it God's will? Now, if it happens to be God's will that iniquity have its way and run its course, then there really isn't a conflict, because on the other side of that, what has he done? He has left his truth for us to find. He has left his keys for us to find. He has spoken the end from the beginning. He has warned us ahead of time. So we can't blame God for leading us down the primrose path. He knew we were going to do it. He knew it was going to happen. He saw it coming. He made preparations against it.
Right.
Like it says in Thomas, he drove his sword through the wall to see if it would pass, and then he killed the strong man. In other words, the whole thing has to play itself out.
Right.
But his right hand and his strength has left it in such a way that there is this antidote. There is this cure. There are these poultices, if you will. There is this eye salve, if you will. That there is this way in which we can overcome, and we can eat of the hidden manna. There are ways of overcoming and bringing fruit, if you will, to the cane, to the canon, to Aaron's rod, in other words, so we can take that piece of wood or whatever that represents, man's authority, and it bears fruit of itself.
Right. And I think on many levels, because we know that it is these words, because there are so many levels of meaning, they really are cluing us in on a lot of what's going on in other dimensions. I mean, this really gets very multidimensional. I mean, our Bible is a very multidimensional text. It's not just what's going on here on planet Earth. We know that. I mean, many of the parables point to things. You have the high heavens. I mean, there's things of that going on in the throne room. You have things that go on in hell. You have things that are in the sea. One of my favorites is Paul talks about, how every tongue is going to confess, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess of things. And it's really the word beings. If you look at it, it's not things. It's the word panta, which is the word beings. Beings in heaven, on earth, under the earth, and in the sea. And then you got to ask yourself, who's he talking about? Mm-hmm. What are fish gonna confess? See, so the deeper level, when you start to see it and ask questions, it's like, what is going on here? So I love those kind of things. And then you search it out. And, to me, the wider read you are, the better prepared you are, because it's like anything. And I think this was a good strategy. There was a strategy, and says that there's a time to scatter and then there's a time to gather. We're in a time of gathering. I think he scattered these texts all over. They're coming from all sorts of crazy places. And the Vatican, we still have to get in there and get their little cachet. But once we're in a season of gathering, and now I think it's a lot of it is to flush it out. So it isn't just what I try to say is the information gives us so many levels. Like Hasatan, there's no realm that he's going to be able to hide. The mystery of iniquity, you know, his whole being. And I think this also shows in the final Elohim's great justice, even though there is our free will and the way the thing has been so wired. When it's all said and done, it will show his perfect justice. Everybody gets what they asked for, you know, what they wanted ultimately. So if you want truth, you know, you will get truth. See, what I do, I have to say this, Robert, because you know, I have started to read deeply into the what is called the mystical tradition writings, the Zohar, which means, I mean, the word itself means brightness. It means radiance. It's like all the light is just like emanates out of these books. And it gives a lot of information on the different dimensions, so to speak, and the different angelic orders. Like, see, this, what I try to tell people is we're in a very populated cosmos. Everybody thinks that all the action is right down here on Earth. Right here, and it's,
yeah, and you see a lot of that in like the ascension of Isaiah, or else in third Enoch. You see a lot of this going up into the heavens and the passwords, and you know, the different ranks, and the, you know, so and you're probably a lot more familiar with that than I am, because I haven't actually delved into the Zohar. So
well, there's just so much. So I mean, we all can't do. Everybody's got to do a little piece. We all know in part, so we all got to do our little part.
Right. But, you know, certainly the fact is that it's there. The fact is that it can be fleshed out even in our day and age with our limited knowledge, with our limited texts. You know, and still, even today, it's like you mentioned the Vatican, you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls taking forever. Who knows what else has been held back? I mean,
Right.
you know, I don't want to sound conspiratorial or whatever, but if you really stop and think about it, this as a whole could not have happened by accident. This is all orchestrated by deep and dark powers that be.
Yeah, the secret
Going
power
all
of
the way back.
lawlessness is about some deep, dark powers,
And
principalities, and powers, ultimately.
you know, and again, I think in our day and age, the biggest thing is really number one, transcending that paradigm.
Right.
When Christianity, if you want to call it that, when that became a thing, when that became a movement, it was about transcending some of the older paradigms, I think, that had been foisted onto the text and foisted onto the people, and like you said, the keys and whatever being withheld from the people. The people who were seeking after them were denied these truths because they wanted the people to be in a state of benightedness. They wanted people to be in a state of ignorance.
Right.
And the reasons are for the same reasons that you can look out into today's world. And this is part of the reason I don't want to bring politics into it, but just because the world is going through some changes right now in a lot of ways because of the internet, because of the way in which information, you know, passes more readily now. When I first started out was back in the 90s when I wanted to find the Book of Enoch. I mean, I literally had to go. I started out going to Christian bookstores, you know, and this is another one of those things that got my back up because I thought maybe at least in some deep, dark corner of the Christian bookstore, they'd have it somewhere squirreled away, but they didn't. And then I ended up having to go to a secular bookstore because, you know, they didn't want to, you know, the place where I went, they didn't want to order a book like that.
Do you know that my husband, we owned a Christian bookstore for 25 years?
Oh, and, yeah, I know that.
And it wasn't until the very end, like the last 5 years, that we started to sell the Book of Enoch. You know, it was getting on people's radar. People were coming in and asking for it. But it's amazing, the publishers, and I know this from there is such a lockdown on information. It's just crazy.
Well, just as an aside, though, since that's part of your own personal experience, did you ever catch flack from Christians, like lay Christians, about it, or, you know, questions as to why you carried it?
Well, yeah, because it would be on the shelf in our research area, and we would get people that would come in to buy it, and then you get the other kind that would be over in research, and they're like, "Why do you have the Book of Enoch over there?" And I'm like, well, don't you know? I mean, it's a good conversation. It would always lead to some good conversations, because by that point, I was reading it and into it, and that's why my husband was carrying it. And we started to bring in a couple other books, like the Forgotten Books of Adam and Eve, and some of these other texts and things. So, but it is fought against. I do have to admit, this is a huge. Satan is not giving up ground, but you have done an amazing job, Robert, of plowing the way. You're one of the first, and you're one of the fathers of kind of, especially on YouTube, promoting the books that are coming back, like quote unquote out of the ground or whatever, and encouraging people to read them. You have a lot of information, and just your whole voice. I tell you, you have such a gift when you read the text.
Well, again, I don't take too much credit for it. What happened was that, like I said, it was kind of in the early 90s. It was in the age before the internet. And what happened was I wanted to read these books. And, I spent a lot of time. I had long commute to work. I was one of the kind of people that I didn't really sit down to read a lot. So when I did, I wanted to make it count. So I read it out on the tape so that I would listen to it over and over and over again. And what happened was I had tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of these tapes that I made just for myself, and I would listen to them because I was studying it all voraciously.
Right.
And then ideas and insights just started coming to me from they would just appear to me. They would become part of my thought process. It's really hard to explain just how it was that I came to understand these things, but some of them were pretty straightforward. Like I was talking to you earlier. I grew to kind of resent, I'm going to be totally honest about it. I grew to kind of resent the way in which these things were suppressed.
Right.
And a lot of the mischaracterizations. Now, I never really minded the honest criticisms of these books or the honest criticisms of these things. I think that there probably are some well-meaning people out there who do see difficulties, who do see, that maybe the Bible talks about it this much and Enoch talks about it this much, and so therefore it's too much, and then things of that sort.
Well, I mean, you can't, but let's just talk about the flip side. You can't be stupid either. There are spurious texts. There are texts that are inserted, I think, and not true. I mean, we are doing this sort of blind. We don't have somebody telling us but I think through the power of discernment, through the power of the Ruach, we're able to ferret it out. But there's a lot of camps, if I can say this, that are looking at these texts from a lot of different angles. I mean, you have a way that you've kind of perfected, or you've done. I'm with a group now that studies the texts. A lot of these, especially ancient, the Essene texts, this is such a world that we never even knew existed. That there is so much literature that I have heard. This gal Rachel Eller, who is a Dead Sea Scrolls, an Israeli Dead Sea Scrolls scholar who's Jewish, say that there is so much writing in there that even the Jews, the most literate Jews, did not know existed. That's how much they lost. She's like, we don't even know that these genres of literature existed in our own tradition. I mean, that's crazy.
And even what's been preserved to us is immense.
Yeah.
It far exceeds the number of scriptures in the canon by several, factor of several times. All of the quote unquote rejected books or the spurious books or whatever that are floating around out there. So, I mean, it's vast. And like I was saying before, the way that we transcend the old paradigm is to understand, again, the keys, because it is a language. It is an understanding. And this is what I tell people when people are always asking me which books are inspired and which aren't or whatever. And I don't exactly have a list for several reasons. I mean, number one, it's kind of going down the same road again as before. But on the other hand, my discernment, like you're talking about, it has to do with, if I handed you a book that was written simply in English of any sort, it could be any book, it could be whatever, and I asked you simply, was this book written in English, right? And not whether you liked the book, whether you agreed with the book, whether you thought the book was this, that, or the other. I was only asking you, was this written in English? If you're a speaker of the English language, you can say, yes, this book is written in English. I don't agree with it, but it's written in English. I don't like it, but it's written in English. That's the, that's the salient question. Now, if there's a way in which the spiritual language gets encoded in such a way that you can decode it, and it unlocks mysteries in the same way that books that you do know and that you do trust unlock, then you could say that this book works. This book functions. This book is something that you can pick up and read and get something out of because you have eyes to see and ears to hear. And so this is how you get around the concept of a closed canon, because a lot of people can't wrap their heads around the idea that you can have an open canon. Because if you have an open canon, you basically are opening up a huge can of worms.
But I think that's a fear. That's a fear-motivated argument.
Yeah, it is fear-driven. I agree.
That we are supposed to trust. I always say, I believe because of my relationship with Yeshua, and because I do ask, and he says, if you ask, for bread, I'm not going to give you a stone. That Yeshua's ability to keep me is greater than the devil's ability to deceive me. Number one, I look at the cup half full. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying, because I feel like I have a relationship, and I know on my inside when I get an icky feeling, or I go, I've learned to discern the spirit, telling me, I remember one night early on, and I was studying something about the 13th zodiacal house. There's a big thing, and I couldn't sleep all night. I was like tossing it. And it early on taught me when you have peace. But my thing is, I read for content. I believe that there are certain theological truths that we can establish. And when you read something, if you see the same theological truth being presented in whatever type of imagery or allegorical language, so to speak, or even plain language, then that, because we have to factor in the fact that there are the line 10 of the scribes, there are banned translations. Some of these scholars probably didn't get all the words right in a lot of these. So you have to factor in a certain amount of, spongy ground you're on. But I still say you can get past that by continuing to plow into it. Like I said, it'd be great if we ever club, because I have listen, what I have found tautology-wise keys. It'll say this in the plain meaning, it'll give the key, right there. And if we could ever come up with like a thesaurus, how they have a Strong's for this, we need to come up with a thesaurus or something of keywords, and how we have absolutely found in print by numerous witnesses in different texts how that word, you've already said like angel's an easy one, angels and birds, or stars, and angels, and like Lucifer being a star that fell. Some of this stuff is easier, but you can get it when you get into some of the, but I go back again, like I believe the Jews have had this encryptedness, and it was given to the early church. Again, the story is the early church, like Paul, it just got corrupted. But I have to just say this one point, because in reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's this one text, and I forget what it's in, where it literally talked about that they had a system, because the oral Torah is given orally. The keys are an oral. There was a book that was kept like a ledger, literally, next to the Holy of Holies that the high priest would go into. And if a prophet came forward with a prophecy, he would go into the Holy of Holies, he would check the ledger, so to speak, to see if that prophet was using the keys correctly according to the way it was supposed to be. So there had to have been, like you say, they had to have a system in place where this was transmitted. And I do believe that, like I see it in, coming down through Elijah and through some of these, Isaiah, the way they use the keys, Jeremiah, you can see these men of God had something that they were banking on. And when they wrote the scriptures. So I think we have to start really try making a new thesaurus here or something.
Well, we could get our heads together. I've got something like that already started. I mean, the thing about it is, how can I put it? The big issue primarily is getting that door open enough to where we get past the past, if you will. To where we, and it may take fleshing everything out, as you say, 100%. before that happens. But like I was saying before, if you listen carefully to what we just discussed earlier, there is enough in just what we have said that a person who really gets it has already sloughed off 2,000 years of false teachings just by recognizing that those teachings are false because they have denied the keys in the first place, and that they have denied certain truths and certain insights that are readily discernible based on just what we've discussed.
Right.
That you can get past it, and that the whole world theoretically could, just from that alone, say, oh, okay, so if this is wrong, now let's all put our heads together. Now
Right.
let's
And I
all get
think that that's
together,
really
and that
kind of
would
what
be
Ronnie
a
and
start.
it's time to put the heads together, because actually everybody has a different gift and calling. I mean, not everybody's going to be able to do this, to read, spend the years. It's time to do it. Plus, I think that this is part of the process, because, that's the whole point of a systematic theology. Eventually you figure it out, you systematize it, it's not ironclad and then it gets presented and it gets preserved. And I'm sure that that's what Ezra did. I mean, that has happened. It's in the text that this is, Yeshua said he restored the keys of the kingdom to his disciples. So it can't be that hard in a sense, because it has been done before.
Right. Again, it's just a matter of fleshing it out. A lot of this is like the same story told over and over and over and over and over again in a lot of different ways.
Exactly.
And I sort of contend that you don't have to know it 100% from beginning to end to get to that point. Like, you can realize that you're reading pattern after pattern after pattern that's kind of saying the same thing, because the whole point really is to overthrow Babylon, to overthrow the false kingdom, to overthrow the world. And like I said, as a first step, that's readily done. A person just seeing the insights that we've discussed this
Right. The
evening.
theory is sound. You cannot, I don't think you can argue against the theory. It
As
is
far as
sound.
all the
It holds water.
particulars are concerned, that's definitely
Right.
something I've been intending to get to,
Right.
been meaning to get to. And again, that's something that you've got a set of keys or whatever, and we could probably get together on that.
We should do a little collaboration. I mean,
yeah.
This is, even from my understanding, in the Great Sanhedrin time of Ezra. I mean, that's his story. He was the leader of the 120, and they did encode and encrypt. He wrote it again. He got it, and because they knew, again, if they lost it, so they actually encrypted and encoded it into the text. So it's there. I mean, I believe Yeshua is showing it. I'm not making this up. And we have multiple witnesses to this. We're very sound-minded people. It is there.
Yeah, people who see it, and that's the thing. I've done a lot of unpacking of it myself. If you go to my website, which is of course scriptural-truth.com, which is run by another YouTuber named Jesus Love, and he's basically got my whole website there with all my videos and all of my the texts and stuff that I've put out. And among those is one called the Guidebook for the Elect, which is also on my YouTube page. And that's broken down into a pretty good template for how to read the keys, if you will. If you're interested in the keys, there's a couple of tracks. One of them is called The Key to Christianity, wherein I explain how the Gospels themselves are parabolic in nature, and it breaks it down as to just how and just why. It's probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about tonight, but for someone who's interested in fleshing this out, I've done a great deal of that. Another one of the chapters in that book is called the Hidden Treasure, where I break down how to interpret parables, and some of the implications of some of the parables, such as the Pearl of Great Price and various other ones that I've broken down. So, anybody who wants to explore it further, I would recommend going
Yeah,
to
tell them
that
um,
site and looking up
your
that source.
YouTube Apocryphal 1970
Yeah,
on
that's my
YouTube,
YouTube page. Uh-huh.
and then Scriptural Truth, and obviously. So, well, I think we should, because like I said, I have I have 50 folders with multiple lists, and I've come to the conclusion right now, I have to stop. So, at a certain point you have to cut yourself off. I'm getting to where I just have to cut myself off. I have to stop, and I have to organize and redact. I'm at the point where I have to redact this thing, because you could just study forever. But it is true, because we're getting killed a lot of ways. We have lost so much information. I just want to end on this. We probably got to wrap this up. It's very long, but the Academy Award, the movie that just won, oh my gosh, it's this movie called The Shape of Water. And I saw it because somebody took me to it. I had no idea what it was. And it is literally, this girl is having sex with a demon. The whole movie, when you have your eyes wide open, you're watching this thing, you're going, what in the world? Because the world has no clue that the occultic, the secret power of lawlessness that is just in their face, totally re-educating and realigning everyone's spirituality. It's very scary. And I think for a big pushback, especially, this generation has no, I just want to make my last point, because, one of the things it testifies to, Robert, is the fact that the ancient world believed in God, a high God. In God. This is one of the things that comes out of this writings is for 4,000 years, everyone believed in this. It was such a prevalent worldview. We live in such a secular, and it's only been in the last 200 years that they've been able to totally write out of the storyline a concept of good and evil, and God and hell and a reward, and that this life is and
Mm-hmm.
I think the keys to this whole is going to bring this back front and center. There has to be a major pushback.
Well, again, everything boils down, I think, to paradigms. People think according to paradigms. I heard a decent lecture the other day called Don't Be Deceived by Alan Watts, where he talks about this. He talks about the paradigm used to be God and the church, and that was pounded into people's heads. And then what happened was people felt very uncomfortable with that, because the way that the guilt was played, and the way that your original sin was played out and everything, it had people feeling very how should I say, uncomfortable about burning in hell forever, and that being their fate, not being worthy, and that and so the paradigm gradually shifted away from that into one where there was no God. Everything was very sanitary and very orderly or whatever, but that there was no divine,
There's
meaning
a
in it.
divine
That
intervention.
that has shifted. The paradigm has shifted in that direction since what they called the Age of Enlightenment, so to speak. That's what they've called. That's what they've called the dead universe, if you will. The enlightenment, that you're just a bag of bones and blood and pus and
Right.
whatever.
Very existential.
You're just and that's what's been forced on us in our world. And of course, Satan's always been there running the show behind the scenes. These are his paradigms. These are his playthings that he's playing around with. This is his kingdom. Those are his rules. These are his paradigms. The fact that there's a closed canon, that's one of his paradigms.
Right, but it's losing ground. We're seeing great headway.
The fact that the universe is dead and sterile is losing ground.
Yeah,
So what he's
so alive.
What he's attempting to do is, now that that atheism and all that is sort of becoming less and less a fact, and more thought of as just a religious point of view, that there is no God, that there's evidence to prove that there are supernatural forces, that there's because of quantum things that have been observed, that there is a consciousness that exists, and so on.
And this is all in the Zohar. This is the point. In Jewish mysticism, they knew all this stuff. Adam, and that's how they knew all this. This is nothing new under the sun. All this information, it's all been known. But I think because I see Satan really educating people to a new spiritual reality that is so dark and totally And we do need to do pushback. And like I said, my study on angels, we need people to understand what we're dealing with. This pushback is, go ahead.
Well, one of the things you have to realize, and I think that this is becoming, a lot of these things are kind of happening behind the scenes that I'm not directly involved in, but that are coming to be in the world. There are things that are coming to a head. People are talking about political awakening. People are talking about just awakenings in general, because again, knowledge is being increased. People are starting to see, and Satan's making his move. If there can't be atheism, if atheism has failed for Satan, he's not going to fill that void with true spiritual knowledge. He's going to fill it with satanic knowledge.
Yeah, and occult knowledge is just.
And he's going to give you the occult again, and it's going to be
repackaged.
The Golden Dawn and, Aleister Crowley and the Illuminati and all this, and it's all this stuff again, that gets rehashed over and over again, because if you're going to have a spiritual thing, it's going to be a twisted spiritual thing, and he's going to force it upon society. But the thing about it is, you have to understand, Enoch's very clear about this, and the parable of the wheat and the tares and the seed and everything. And I don't want to open up that can of worms this far into the conversation, but as far as it being true, there are people who are of a spiritual nature such that they are akin to the dark spirit.
Absolutely.
There are people who are of the spiritual
are sons of darkness. They're always.
So, now those people, many of them are aware, and some of them are the ones which are less aware of their spiritual origin are easily manipulated and used as basically useful idiots by Satan in order to accomplish his will.
Yeah, that's why you want an ignorant mass middle population.
And so the key is, how do we take people and separate the wheat, if you will, from the tares, the sheep from the goats? What is the mechanism? And right now, it has to do a lot with objective versus subjective reality. The people who are primarily ruled by feelings and by irrational, how should I say, means, a lot of times they will try to censor truth, or try to cover up truth, or try to use deceptive means or whatever to keep truth from coming about. And again, it's manifesting itself in a million different ways in the world all around us. But one of the ways in which it's has manifested, is in terms of the truth about the religion, the truth about God's word. That there people who are sons and daughters, if you will, of darkness, who are of that spirit, who are of that demon seed, if you will, they see the truth as a threat. They see the truth as scary and threatening, and as something to be stopped. And they dream of a post-truth world. They dream of a post-truth reality where everything is entirely subjective. They're thinking of a time when truth is beside the point.
Right, and that's the old Luciferian, the do as thou wilt.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really objective, and you have, it comes back to the same. There's nothing new under the sun. You keep Torah or do as thou wilt. There's really always been two roads, and
right.
None of us do it perfectly. That's why there's mercy, and there's justice. He has a built-in system to help people navigate. But I do see the keys are very useful, because with this occult explosion that is just so in our face, and most people are sitting back absorbing it and not really understanding what is hitting them, I think the keys are going to really bring it front and center, because my research has shown that these words are totally encrypted with all the different dimensional levels and how they interface with us and how they do it. And this is some information we need to get out there. So, the wheat and the tares, that's a whole one for a whole subject. But if it's true, if it is encoded and encrypted, the sons of the tares, this whole world, how it really has always been among us, so to speak, on levels that we never even dreamed imaginable.
Yeah, and what's scary is the numbers. It seems like if you take, when you read in the book of Revelation that those who are outside of the kingdom are those who love and make a lie, and you think about the ways in which lies are made, and the ways in which lies serve certain people. Again, I don't mean to just single out the media or any other single institution. It's pretty much pandemic. People will be self-serving, if you will, as opposed to serving God, and they will serve their own self-interest as opposed to serving the truth or even their own fellow, human being. They'll place their advantage over the
The
overall
common good,
good.
yeah, and that's
Yeah, and
totally,
so
that's how history plays out. When people become lovers of themselves, lovers of pleasure, and not keeping, a commandment filled lifestyle, what you choose. So yeah, this is all, we're seeing it played out. But I probably, Robert, like I said, we've been at this a long time. I'm going to upload this. I'll send it to you, and I hope you put it up on your channel too, and we can start a dialogue and maybe
okay,
even
well,
start some literally putting it together, because
we need to get people on board, that's for sure.
yeah,
It's the multitude of the wise that is the safety of the world. And the elect, they're going to go through the world like sparks through the stubble. Burn it up. That's what needs to happen.
yeah. And I think that once the train gets going, I do, because people are also very they're weary. I mean, seriously, the flip side is there's so much sickness and death and unhealthiness and generational. I mean, look at our kids today with the epidemic. I mean, people realize something's really wrong. Something is very wrong. And if we can, always the hope of the gospel is to offer people. But I think we have to present it in a way that is not in kindergarten, that is not, just Jesus loves you, just it has to have meat,
The good news,
power.
the good news is it starts pretty much where they are. It starts with the canon. Figuratively speaking, when Jesus says, eat what they place before you and heal the sick among them, that spiritually, that's what they believe that they're giving you to eat spiritually, and you're healing the spiritually sick among them by doing so. It's in their books, it's in their canon, it's in exactly what they already accept. And so it's going to be that cutting between the spirit and the soul, if you will, within each individual, whether or not they respond to truth or tradition, whether or not they have the spirit of truth in them, or whether or not they are the spirit of the disobedient. I don't think it's going to be a super smooth transition.
No,
I think they're going to face
tribulation.
opposition, and then there will be that. I don't think that we can look to the institutions for much help, although I would hope that there would be some institutions that would do the right thing. But that's not what we're looking to. We're looking to the people at the ends of the streets.
Yeah,
That's what it's really come down to.
and it's a remnant. It always
Everybody else
was.
has refused the banquet. We're invited, and so it'll be the last and the least, and that's as it should be, and that's as it's been prophesied. So
Right.
I anticipate that's exactly the way it's going to go down. It's going to be the last, it's going to be the least, but it will be them we will eat. So
Yeah, it's a huge banquet on a mountain of all sorts of choice delicacies and aged wine and really choice cuts of meat. But I came across this verse because I always have had this in, I don't know, Zechariah, and I should have it, but it says that when he gathers the nations, when he is done gathering out of the nations, all those who are going to be his people, all this, that it's going to leave the God, small g, like completely famished and empty. Like, I almost wonder if, and it would be just like Yahweh to end on such a big note, that there will be so many people once the ball gets rolling and people real that there will be such a harvest in the earth for his glory. I don't know. So, I'm a very positive, optimistic person. I always look at the cup half full. So
well, at some point, I think that will happen. I think what you're going to find is that a lot of people who are sitting on their hands right now, sitting on the fence, are doing so because they're hiding and watching. They're waiting to see what happens.
right.
And
So
the more people make it happen, and the more people manifest it, and I think that God's going to play a hand in it. It's all going to be according to his timing.
yeah.
But he's looking for vessels. He's looking for, mouths to speak, and
Right.
hands to work. And, so
So for his glory.
we
So
could use some help too. We could use some input. We can use some people out there, fighting in the trenches with us.
Sure.
You know,
I
so.
could, yeah. So, well, Robert, we'll talk again real soon. I am going to just have to end this and upload this, and you'll send it to you, and we'll talk and we'll do this again.
All right, it's been a pleasure, Miss
Hey,
Liz.
shalom, and really and truly, I thank you, brother.
All right, God bless.
All right, God bless.